So one food myth you wish everyone would stop believing.
I wish people would look at the science and stop believing that organically grown foods are more nutritious or safer to eat or better for the environment than conventionally grown foods.
You're not eating cleaner, you're just paying more.
A Stanford study shows no major difference in vitamin levels of organic and non-organic.
It's not science, it's storytelling on a label.
Organic foods cost 47% more, with no proven nutrition gain.
Controversial question again, or to get your perspective on the study of organic farming, right? So I think I wrote you about the study from Albert Howard in 1905 staying in India. He
seemed to be not so interested in the well-being of people. He was more interested in, of course, he'd studied soil science. He was more interested in the health of the soil than he was in the health of the people.
Talking about Vandana Shiva, the environmentalist from India, her argument is when you measure biodiversity, you can grow more food. But if you like to feed the world, we should grow more diverse crops. If you want to starve the world, then you grow monoculture.
Monoculture is a misunderstood word. If you have the same crop in a single field, that's considered a monoculture. But if you go from corn in one year in that field to soybeans in the next year, that's a crop rotation. It's no longer a continuous monoculture.
Then I think the next question is on the GMO versus non-GMOs.
The GMOs stands for genetically modified organism, which is not a scientific term. It was a political term attached to these. Environmentalists also say they want to address agricultural productivity and hunger, but they don't want GMOs.
And I think you're pro for imitation meats. What's your take on the?
My views on this have changed actually since I wrote my book. When I wrote my book, pathogens will become resistant to the antibiotics,
right?
And then when people go to the hospital with an infection, the antibiotics won't work anymore. That's the major risk of doing this.
If you had to choose a dinner guest from the world of food activism, who would it be? Thank you so much, Robert, for joining and continuing our conversation on your book, Resetting the Table. But I think while we have covered important topics last time when we spoke about while you don't like the word industrial farming, but industrial processing and animal farming, and how the excessive food options are actually leading to the obesity and all the health hazards or crisis which we have in the current world. So, and also your views on Make America Healthy Again as well, so it was very powerful. So I think while you mentioned about the second edition of your Food Politics, so I have here.
Oh, good. Yeah, but there's a third edition. You're showing me the second edition.
Yes, yeah. So I think I try to make sure I get the second edition and then go one understand the next. I think you mentioned very specifically that you're covering some of the changes, fisheries. I see that in the preface, the changes what you're trying to cover, livestock, meat consumption. I will order the third edition too. So that's the one which is the more latest version of it.
Yes, just 1 second. I'll show it to you. This is the third edition.
Oh yeah, that's a yes. Oh, I saw the digital version of it. Yes, maybe when I ordered it, I wanted to make sure that I get the second edition. But okay, great to know that the third edition is also available. So let me order.
Yeah.
But and there is this question also, right? Sorry to interrupt, Robert. The even washing doesn't actually take off the pesticide residue to an extent, right? Just running water do you think it's going to remove some of the residual pesticides, or it's just to be more cautious? That's it. It's not going to.
It's a precaution, and many foods in the supermarket have been washed more than once.
Yeah.
But in some developing countries, pesticides are poorly regulated, and they'll be sprayed on a product just
Right.
before it's harvested, and then sold without being washed, and that does create a risk. The greatest risks from pesticides have always been not to food consumers, but they're the occupational risks that accompany the handling and the spraying of the chemicals. And that's well regulated in developed countries as well, and it's very poorly regulated in developing countries. In developing countries, you'll see men in the field with a backpack sprayer spraying insecticides on a crop, and they won't be wearing any shoes. They'll just have sandals. They won't be wearing a shirt because it's hot. So they're exposing their skin to
Through
those.
all the chemicals. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's terribly unsafe.
Even I know a lot of countries where the food to bean, let's say, for carrot to retain its color, the orange or even the green color, for other vegetables, right? So they spray and make it fresh. So and this is the constant discussion, especially from the place where I come from. We used to have a lot of mangoes. So the mango naturally ripes in the tree. So, but if you need a scale and you need a lot of mangoes to actually distribute, and then nobody will have time to wait until it's ripe, so they just pick the unripe and then they put limestones to do to have the ripe mango. So so those are but I think then it becomes okay, how do we differentiate between organic mangoes who probably may not use limestone or probably not use the pesticides which to make make it ripe, or in ancient time, and when I grew up, so we used to, the bananas, I had like so many banana trees in my house. So the bananas, does sometimes you don't leave the entire banana to be ripe in the tree, so we just cut that entire and then put it into a sack, and then you just create a smoke and then that helps it's to ripe probably in a time. So those are practices we have done it.
Yeah, and but if you peel the banana, isn't the banana inside still pretty
Inside.
safe?
Yeah, but it is actually. But I think those are safer options, which is known, like not really a chemical base, but I think you just or you can put it into a rice. So we've tried if there are rice, even if you take an avocado and if it's not ripe, you put it into a rice bowl and you keep it for a while, it ripes.
Yeah, avocados drive me crazy because when I get them in the market, I know they're not ready to cut
Yeah,
into.
most of the time, yeah, they are
And
not ripe. Most
I
of the time.
know, and so we've slowly learned how many days to wait before cutting into them.
Yeah, I think this is also a dangerous way to look at food, right? Because we expect all the foods to be available, or all the fruits to be available at all seasons, and don't eat the seasonal fruits. So do you think that's also one way to reduce the toxins, or probably take, let's say, but there is other counter argument which says today we are in a global environment that where, for example, if there's a specific season for avocados
Yeah,
in one region, but maybe a different season the avocado is brought, so in that way it's available throughout the year. So I mean, in general, that's also a question which comes in, right?
right,
Do you really
right.
choose the seasonal fruit, or you don't have to restrict yourself to do that?
Yeah, well, I live in Massachusetts, which is cold 5 or 6 months of the year, and you can't get locally grown fruit
Yes.
and vegetables in in abundance. In fact, some of them you can't even get from California because they're tropical products. And so if we want to eat more fruits and vegetables, and we shouldn't restrict ourselves to what is seasonable in our part of the world. We should take full advantage. We should take, and we are in the United States. We're
In the
taking
global,
advantage of a global market. We
Yes.
import fruits and vegetables off season from the southern hemisphere. I get blueberries from Chile, and we get tropical products from Central America and even from China.
China,
It's
the grapefruit
if-
or durian now.
yeah, it's most people don't realize that in the United States we import about a third of our vegetables and about 50% of our fresh fruit. And I'm glad that we do. If we didn't, our diets would be even worse than they are.
Yeah, I think in spite of the global market and having the variety of fruits and vegetables, the amount of ultra processed and processed foods consumption is very high. And,
Yes.
and-
Oh, yeah. I'm not talking about.
yeah,
Ultra processed vegetable products. I'm talking about the vegetables themselves.
themselves, right? Yeah. And okay, so moving to the humane animal welfare. So animal farming, I think I got this book which I was reading from Leah Grasses, that the movement to free US from factory farming. So that's her book. And also there is a project Animal Farm. So there is a lot of people who are against, especially me being vegan for the last 8 years. We in terms of choosing the ethical options of eating or not harming animals, but in general, the I know if I go back to a decade back or 2010 to know, I think the awareness of what happens inside an animal farm was not so much available in the internet, but today there is a lot of awareness. And then how even the farmers who actually got into this trap, they want to do a change or probably want to come out, and that's what Leah Graces talks about. Or how do you make that shift from doing more ethical ways, or probably not having that kind of a cruelty which is happening in the animal farming. So you're talking about but I mean, you have a different perspective. I mean, I understand that we can't really avoid the animal farming, but how do we make it more sustainable, or have more space and light, even if it's within the environment? So that is one question I have, like, what is your perspective? But there is also this pasture fed cows, and this greenwashing which is happening across the industry today, right? Because there's a lot of free range eggs. So there's too many different ways they're trying to probably trick the consumers, but I don't think so they really do. The pasture fed is not really, you have a 10 acres of land where the cattle are actually freely moving, and there's no space these days. So what's your perspective on these?
Right. It's many of our fellow citizens are going to eat meat from animals. So it's up to everyone to imagine a humane way to raise and to slaughter these animals. We're not all going to become vegetarians, or let alone vegans, anytime soon. And so it's a serious social problem. We owe it to the animals to protect their welfare. While we're using them for meat, we owe them that kind of protection. And the veterinarians that I talk to, who know the most about this problem, have convinced me that it's ethically acceptable to raise animals for meat, as long as when we kill them, their death is virtually instantaneous and unanticipated. Now that's a pretty high standard.
Yeah.
But I think we've learned that we can get pretty close to that standard. The other half of the problem is before we kill them, we have to guarantee them humane treatment. We have to protect their health and their comfort, and give them access to the stimulation and the social interaction that someone of their species expects and deserves. And this is where modern factory farming has most often failed. And I should say, another distinction is important. It has failed most often not for dairy cows and beef cattle. Those animals aren't in tight confinement. The beef cattle live their entire life outdoors, initially on pasture for 6 to 12 months, and only the last 6 months in a feedlot, and they're still outdoors. Dairy cattle are usually in the United States in a temperature-controlled barn or under cover on a feed lot there, but they walk several times a day to the milking parlor, so they're not tightly. And seasonally, they'll probably have access to some pasture. So the beef and dairy cattle are not under the tight confinement that where you see the videos on television or on your phone. The violation of humane standards is most prevalent in the United States in poultry, especially broiler chickens, and even more than that, egg-laying hens, and also pigs. So poultry and swine, that's where the modern production systems are much too confining. They've gone overboard in trying to reduce labor costs and facilities costs by packing as many animals in as they can get away with, and that's sad, and that's wrong, and we should correct it. So how do you correct it? My book does not say we should move all those animals outdoors on
Yes.
pastures. That's not always good for them, because outdoors they encounter extreme temperatures. I mean, in Indiana, when my dad was growing up, they had pigs on their farm, and the pigs were mostly outdoors. And when they had piglets in the wintertime, many of them froze to death. That wasn't wonderful. Also, if they're outdoors, they're exposed to predators. Chickens are a tasty feast for coyotes and for hawks. When they're outdoors, they're also exposed to infectious and parasitic disease. The disease load on animals that are raised outdoors is much higher. And their food supply may not be adequate. In much of Latin America, cattle that are grazed in Brazil, for example, won't get adequate feed supplies in the dry season. There won't be enough good grass for them to eat. So moving the animals outdoors by itself isn't always a perfect solution. I think the best solution available now is to do what livestock producers in Europe do. I've looked at pig and poultry farming in Europe, and they keep the animals indoors, in part for biosafety. They don't want pigs and chickens exposed to bird flu from wild birds. They keep them indoors, but they have regulations that ensure much more space for them to move around, much more light, no loud noises, plenty of space for them to lie down, and even enrichments. They want to have posts for birds to perch on. They actually they put objects that can be manipulated in the pens with the pigs. Pigs are very intelligent,
Yes.
very social, and they get bored easily. And they make, in Europe, they insist upon having enrichments in the piggery that will keep the animals much more comfortable. So, but this is in the United States, it's an unsolved problem, and we have to be doing much better. But you encounter
It's not.
you encounter resistance from the livestock industry if you
Yeah.
try to tell them that they should space the animals out more than they are.
I think it's directly proportionate, or probably the direct impact of that we have seen in the last 40, 50 years in terms of the growth and the way people have become, and even the obesity rate, right? The amount of growth hormones and the way these animals are actually grown to produce more meat. So that's also something which you've talked about in the book, and even in the first chapter as well, in terms of, or the introduction, you're talking about how people have evolved, the way an average American looked in 60s versus now, and even the children. Do you think the antibiotics and also the hormones which are fed in terms of having these overly bigger animals, which is then sent it to the process for the consumption, so that's having an health hazard and impacts the growth? When I say
Yeah.
in terms of the overgrowth and the way it is actually killing our metabolism, and also the kind of chronic allergies and diseases which is prevalent in the America. So, or even, I mean, across the world, I would say everywhere is the same pattern. I don't see any difference, whether it be in India or Europe. But maybe there is, the regulations have come in, probably it's getting better. So what do you think? I mean,
Yeah,
whether
I
it's,
think
go ahead.
I think there are serious risks from excessive antibiotic use in livestock production, particularly when the antibiotics are being used to accelerate weight gain
Right.
rather than to protect the animals from disease.
From the disease,
And
yes.
we have and we are slowly imposing tighter regulations on the use of antibiotics for that purpose in the United States. And of course, there's a segment in the market that advertises products that are antibiotic free. And as more consumers take an interest in those products, it'll be easier and easier for the regulators to crack down on the producers that are heavily reliant on antibiotics for weight gain purposes. The risk here is that pathogens will become resistant to the antibiotics,
Right.
and then when people go to the hospital with an infection, the antibiotics won't work anymore. That's the major risk of doing this.
That's a
And,
dangerous.
and the livestock industry says, oh, well, the antibiotics that we use aren't the same ones that are used in human medicine. And that's often the case, but that's not always the case. And I'd rather not take the risks that we're taking right now with antibiotic use in the livestock sector, just for the purpose of helping the animals grow fast. Because it's not so good for the animals either. Sometimes we have overbred, particularly in egg-laying hens and broiler chickens. We have used modern breeding to create animals that live an unhealthy life before we finally take their life, and that's not something we should be proud of.
Yeah, I think it's also there's other moral impact, which I mean, there's not much of research or scientific papers about it, but there's a lot of talk about even especially I mean, you talked about the chickens and the egglings, how they are handled, but if they go through that entire life in that confinement and probably the torture, so when along with the hormone and the growth hormone, so when it comes for consumption, so the all negative when a human goes through something like that, it's a depression, and the hormonal changes which happens inside the body, which we can feel. But the same way, we don't really give importance to what goes through in those sentient beings, right? And then it translates into the food, and it comes to you as 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 an impact from a chronic disease and what.
Right.
I think it's more from a moral and ethical compass as well, in terms of at least not to handle it that way, which I'm not sure how many, I mean, as you said, probably the regulations are coming, but maybe it's a long way to go. I think so.
Yeah. Well, meat consumption isn't, it's changeable. But usually it changes when consumers start to worry about health. In the 1970s, people realized that eating too much red meat might lead to cardiovascular disease or cancer. It turns out that we exaggerated the risk for cardiovascular disease, but people nonetheless changed their diets, and red meat consumption, beef consumption in the United States peaked back in per capita peaked in 1976, and it's now 30% lower per capita than it was then. So people moved away from beef consumption on a per capita basis dramatically after the 1970s, and they shifted their meat consumption to poultry and to swine. So meat consumption didn't go down; it just shifted away from red meat to poultry and swine. And it's not clear that that was such a health benefit. It probably was. It was probably a benefit for the climate because beef cattle are ruminant animals, and they belch out a lot of methane, which is
that's what's one of my point to discuss. I think you got to that right point.
Yeah.
With your recent article on the methane. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think your article talks about methane reduction in livestock, confronting the north-south gap. So maybe throw some light on that. That's an interesting.
Yeah. This is an interesting problem. Methane from ruminant animals is a far more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. It's not as persistent in the atmosphere, but it accounts for about a third of all of the human-induced global warming that we have experienced. Not all methane comes from animals. A lot of it comes from swamps or from landfills or from irrigated rice cultivation. But the methane that comes from animals is a significant part of the total. And we've done a pretty good job in the global north of reducing methane emissions for every pound of meat or for every gallon of milk that's produced by dairy cattle. But we've done that not by focusing on the methane. We did it by increasing the productivity of the animals. We improved the genetics of the animals so that more of the energy they took in went to weight gain or to milk production. We gave them high energy feed, and we improved their veterinary care, and as a result, the methane intensity of beef and dairy production in the United States and in Europe dropped dramatically. We haven't done that yet in the global south. So in Brazil today, every pound of beef production results in more than twice as much methane as it does in the United States. In India today, every gallon of milk production results in at least twice as much methane as a gallon of milk production in Europe or the United States. So I advocate upgrading livestock production systems in the global south, giving them higher energy feed, giving them better veterinary care, and breeding them for specialization. In the old days, cattle breeds were multi-purpose. You used them for meat and milk production. You also used them to pull wagons or plow fields. And now in advanced industrial countries today, the breeds are specialized. They're either for milk production or for meat production. And we don't need them to pull wagons anymore. As the global south moves in that same direction, the efficiency of their production will improve, and the quantity of methane that the animals burp out relative to their product of meat and milk will be much lower.
Lower. I think you also mentioned it right. It accounts for roughly 30% of rise in global temperature.
Yeah.
Right, experience since the industrial revolution. So I think it's a direct impact, and probably it's a very important topic to talk about. Right, the rise in temperature. It's been getting warmer year by year with all the climate change and with the pollution what's in the environment. So the methane is one important contributor to that. Yeah. Okay, I think I know if we end up food and food politics and food science, agriculture is more of a never ending conversations we can actually continue doing for weeks or months for sure, right? Especially with experts like you gathering the wisdom. I think it's more of it's going to be an endless conversation. But I think food politics, I know you covered a lot. So maybe we can take it up in another conversation. But I think I want to continue our conversation on organic farming. So my what I wrote to you about the follow-ups on, I mean, you have talked about alley cropping a lot in the whether the peasants should stay poor in that chapter, and also the green revolution. So I want to deep dive a bit on that. So while we talked about the organic farming and non-organic farming, the controversial question again, or to get your perspective on the study of organic farming, right? So I think I wrote you about the study from Albert Howard in 1905, staying in India. He actually did do a lot of research about the organic farming, and he started spreading the importance of organic farming to the world. And I think what I understand is in his book, the humus keeping water in the soil and the role of mycorrhiza, right? The fungi which is responsible for retaining the soil's liveliness. So he talks a lot about the importance of growing sustainable food, and how do we make sure that the local farmers are actually using the organic way of producing food. um, what's your I mean, what is your perspective about that? And I wanted to get, while you have a different take on the organic produce, and you say that in the developed countries, as I summarized from our last conversation, is that in the developed countries where there are a lot of regulations, the residual pesticides in the produce may not be that much, or it is still within the levels of the FDA, or the scientists agree to it. But what is your perspective on?
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, organic farming doesn't just prohibit the use of synthetic pesticides, it prohibits the use of all synthetic chemicals, including nitrogen. And that's important because manufactured nitrogen was probably the single most important scientific breakthrough of the 20th century to assist in the abundant production of food. Now, Albert Howard hoped to provide nitrogen and other good soil amendments through a composting system, where he would compost vegetable waste and animal waste and even human waste, and make a humus that would nurture plants. And it worked. It worked, but it was a lot of hard work for a lot of very poor peasants. And once farmers get access to manufactured nitrogen fertilizer that doesn't have to be meticulously composted and turned over periodically and moved around and gathered from animal pens and from vegetable waste, once they get access to manufactured nitrogen fertilizer, they don't want to spend the time with the organic alternative. And that's why only a tiny amount of farming now in the 21st century could be certified organic, because nitrogen fertilizer is in such widespread use. But Albert Howard he wasn't just, I think, inadequately alert to the labor costs of his method. He had a mystical belief that mixing naturally occurring things like vegetable waste and animal manure into the soil would bring the soil to life, and that life would then be transferred through the plants grown in the soil to food consumers. He thought that what he called healthy soil was actually the key to human health. And he believed that if you use something artificial to grow a plant, something like manufactured nitrogen, the result is going to be an artificial plant and artificial food and eventually artificial people. He had a worldview. Some people say it was a mystical worldview that he picked up in India. He had a worldview that isn't supported by good science. So his method was inconvenient for farmers who didn't want to invest the labor, and it was not scientifically supported for one of its major claims, which is that you can't be healthy if you're not eating organically grown food. We have plenty of healthy people who are not eating organically grown food.
Okay. No, it's more of a different perspective maybe at the time when he did the research, because I think there's is talked about his indoor movement, and what he learned, and how the composting is also an important aspect of how do we get that for the growth of the crops. So maybe the advancement of technology wasn't that prevalent at that point in time, especially the labor intense. How do we reduce the labor required to for this process is something which came later. So maybe that's also one.
Yeah, I think he wasn't an economist. He wasn't a sociologist. He wasn't interested. He wasn't that interested in social advancement. He not only praised peasant farming in India, where vast numbers of people were undernourished and experiencing periodic famine. He also praised peasant farming in China, where poor farmers were equally destitute and equally undernourished. He seemed to be not so interested in the well-being of people. He was more interested in, of course, he'd studied soil science. He was more interested in the health of the soil than he was in the health of the people.
Got it. But I mean, while the famine, the main reason for the famine was due to the colonization of the British in terms of extracting all the resources. If I go back to the history, right? It's not maybe one of the that's the reason for not having the resources to actually grow more crops. So I mean, again, there are multitudes of reasons to it, but I mean, you also would agree to the fact that it is during that it's the reason of the colonization is the major impact for or countries like India and the other places where there was a famine, correct? I mean, if I again, the follow-up question for me is that if you're talking about the Vandana Shiva, the environmentalist from India. I mean, to a precisely probably more than a page in detail about her thoughts and on the should peasants stay poor in that chapter. Her argument is when you because I think this is also I wrote to you when you measure biodiversity, you can grow more food, and if you like to feed the world, we should grow more diverse crops. If you want to starve the world, then you grow monoculture like soy or corn, where the 90%, as you also mentioned in the book, of soy and corn production globally goes to biofuel and animal feed. So, which is the main reason also still hunger in underdeveloped countries. I think I have sent you the report, the Global Report on Food Crisis, GRFC, released in May, which still says it's actually doubled from 2016, while it is actually tripled from the earlier, when they did triples of the number of people facing acute hunger since 2016 and a doubling since 2020 till now. So do you feel the commoditization or probably more of these monoculture and trying to use those to biofuel or probably for the industrial processing is reducing the funds or the need for humanitarian aid where
the report that you referenced doesn't attribute the food insecurity or the hunger that they report on to monoculture or to a decline in crop yields or to the failure of agriculture. They point instead most often
the crisis
to violent conflict, and that's not an agricultural problem. That's a social problem. If you look at where people are hungry in the world today, it's acutely hungry. It is in places like Somalia or Sudan or Yemen or the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are societies torn apart by violent conflict. And farmers in the countryside can't be productive if their crops are being burned by by militia warriors who want to deny the food to their adversaries, or if they themselves are physically insecure because of the fighting surrounding them, or if all the young men are kidnapped to be soldiers. This destroys agriculture. It destroys the exchange of agricultural goods, and it leaves societies vulnerable to acute hunger and even starvation. But that's not an agricultural problem. That's a human conflict problem. There are other people in the world who are hungry, not because of violent conflict, but because their governments have either taken away the rights of individuals to grow food and to own land and to exchange things in the marketplace. Countries like North Korea, which is a police state, a fascist communist police state run by a monarch. This political system is a calamity, and they had a terrible famine there in the 1990s, and they've been food insecure ever since. Or Cuba, another Marxist state that does not allow private markets to operate, and they're now barely feeding their population, mostly on imported food that still has to be rationed. If they were to permit Cuban peasants to own their own land and to sell their food into a marketplace, they wouldn't be struggling that way. And then there's Venezuela, also governed by a single party Marxist regime, which drove its economy. When the price of oil collapsed, their economy collapsed, and they couldn't import any more food, and people, in order to get food, had to become refugees and flee to Colombia. So there's a lot of hunger out there, but very little of it has anything to do with the underperformance of agriculture. It's the underperformance of governments in these failed states, or it's war fighting among armed ethnic groups, rival ethnic groups in civil war states. That's the source of most acute hunger in the world today.
No, you're right. I think the report also alludes to, in terms of the crisis, the continuous issues, but so what you're saying is monoculture is not or trying to, the production of crops is fine, but then the 90% of production is going to more of biofuel or the animal feed is not a bigger concern? Or do you see that as probably we should reduce that and divert it to where there is a real need of food, or from an import and export or global production standpoint?
Well, monoculture is a misunderstood word. If you have the same crop in a single field, that's considered a monoculture. But if you go from corn in one year in that field to soybeans in the next year, that's a crop rotation. It's no longer a continuous monoculture. The alternative to excessive monoculture is crop rotation, and conventional farmers do that all the time. Most cornfields in the United States this year were planting soybeans last year. So it's not as though we're driving the agricultural system in the ground by only planting one thing. And Vandana Shiva gets something else wrong. She said that the wheat and rice varieties that were introduced by plant breeders in India in the 1960s and the 1970s were built on a dangerously narrow genetic base. And she thought that eventually they'll prove unsustainable. Well, they haven't proved unsustainable. Crop production in India, rice and wheat production in India, has increased dramatically. since she wrote her book in the early 1990s. So her prediction of a collapse was wrong. And it's because her understanding of a broad genetic base was wrong. She didn't realize that most of the new varieties of wheat and rice had been developed by plant breeders using selections from a dozen or more different varieties. So the genetics of a single new rice plant contained the genetic traits of dozens of pre-Green Revolution rice plants, and that conferred resistance to pests and diseases of many different kinds. And so Indian agriculture hasn't undergone any of the collapse that she was so firmly predicting 35 years ago.
Yeah, you're right, but I think the preserving the seed in terms of not undergoing the then I think the next question is on the GMO versus non-GMOs. I think she still is the major power of not having the India not having the GMO produced crops predominantly, or even across the globe. Even there is a label which is coming, right, as you even talked about, the non-GMO, because people are still not sure of what is the implications in terms of the health, whether to going with a GMO based produce. So I think my next question is on that.
Well, we should first clarify that the new wheat and rice varieties introduced in the 1960s and the 1970s were not GMOs. They were not transgenic. They were developed using conventional plant breeding.
Okay.
The GMOs stands for genetically modified organism, which is not a scientific term. It was a political term attached to these. The scientific term would be transgenic, because genetic traits were physically transferred from a source organism into the living DNA of a target organism, conferring some new advantage, some new biotic or abiotic resistance trait to the new plant. And those raised anxieties when they were first introduced into the market in the 1990s. Nobody expected the level of anxiety. The problem was that genetically modified soybeans were introduced into Europe in 1996, in exactly the same month that a food panic occurred over mad cow disease. And food safety officials in Europe had told consumers that eating meat from animals that were diseased with BSE, mad cow disease, was perfectly safe. So they continued eating the meat, and then they discovered no, it wasn't safe. You could get a lethal disease, a prion disease, from eating this meat, and so consumers were outraged that their food safety specialists had led them in the wrong direction. So when the same food safety specialists told them in 1996 that it was perfectly safe to eat these transgenic soybeans, European consumers said, hey, no, wait a minute. That's what you told us about BSE meat, and you were wrong then. How do we know you're not wrong now? And activist groups saw the advantage here that they had, and they launched campaigns against these GMO crops. GMO crops were also unpopular in Europe because they were being imported from the United States, and they were produced by a large multinational corporation, the Monsanto Corporation, which had earlier been primarily a chemical company. So it was relatively easy to demonize. And so there was a panic in Europe, not just over mad cow disease and diseased meat, but also over GMOs. And European politicians responded to this by setting in place impossibly strict regulations that made it virtually impossible for farmers in Europe to plant GMOs and virtually impossible for food manufacturing companies in Europe to manufacture foods using GMOs. And so GMO foods have been mostly driven out of the market in Europe ever since.
Got it. Got it.
But it's important to know that even in Europe, where these GMO crops were so heavily stigmatized, all of the national science academies in Europe, including in France, in the UK, in Germany, they've all said that they can't find any convincing evidence of any new risks, either to human health or to the environment, from any of the GMO crops that have been offered to the market so far. So there's a scientific consensus that there's nothing to worry about here, but the political and the social consensus is, oh, we don't want these things. Now,
But how do we prove? See, the scientific evidences would be more of sampling of test which they would have done, but probably the long-term impact, or once you start consuming, or the population starts consuming those food for a long period, so then the impact of that would not be known until so in today's scenario we cannot really point to one specific food, or the way it is processed, or the way it is grown as a reason for any chronic disease or complications, because there's multitude of problems which might come in. So it probably even the scientific proof which they have taken at that point in time would have to wait for at least 5 to 10 years for the population to start consuming and see what is the impact of their health, or probably take one before and after to continuously monitor. But I don't think so we have reached any far in terms of trial and error with the human population.
yeah, well, maybe that might be a practical strategy that an individual consumer could take. They don't want to eat these things until I've seen other people eating them for 10 years with no evidence of a problem. But governments can't regulate new technologies that way. You can't. What if cell phones were presented to the market in year one, and government said, well, we're not going to let anyone buy these things for 10 years until we're absolutely certain that putting it against your head doesn't result in a developmental deficit. That would have been an excessive caution, and people wouldn't have stood for it. In fact, with most new technologies, we don't take that kind of excessively cautious approach. If we see a benefit, if we see a benefit, we want the technology now. Now, the problem with GMO crops is that the first generation of these crops were developed to give benefits to farmers so that they could control weeds and insects at a lower cost. And they weren't developed to give any new benefit to consumers. GMO varieties of corn didn't taste any better or look any better, weren't any more nutritious than conventional varieties of corn. So consumers said, well, I don't see any benefit here, and I lose nothing if my government places tight regulation on these products and if my farmers don't grow them. So we have GMOs in medicine that people saw, the end users saw a benefit and insisted on getting them onto the market, and they're on the market in Europe just as much as the biologic drugs are on the market in the United States. But the end users of these GMO crops weren't the farmers that got the benefit. They were food consumers who didn't see a benefit. And so tighter regulations were, in Europe at least, put in place and accepted by ordinary consumers. And now we've had so many years of no GMO crops on the market in Europe, even though time has gone by, we don't have the evidence that you were looking for of whether it's safe or not. If you
Yeah.
don't ever try anything, you haven't proved or disproved its safety.
Yeah, I think it's, as you say, technology advancements, when it's not impacting, say, anything which comes to food or probably which the human has to, there is a psychological impact to it in terms of, what you put into your body and probably what is the impact long term. So any disease which comes, or probably over the last 2 to 3 decades, always there has been a factor of food-induced diseases. Right? I mean, or probably due to foodborne, or like whatever the flus what we've had through food, right? Whether it is salmonella or your bird flu, whatever different forms of foodborne infections which has come. So basically, anything you change in the food system or ecosystem where it is modified, there is a resistance. I think I believe probably if it's outside, like a technology, like a cell phone or a camera, or probably any new advancements happening where it's not directly impacting, unless and until you really have a real example of there is an impact to your health, I don't think so anybody bothers. Right? I think there is a, so it's easy to consumerize those products. Then when it comes to food, there is a lot of caution from the consumer or even from the government. I think that's my view, or probably what I've seen in general.
Yeah, I think, of course, we put medicines inside our body too.
Yes. So
And-
that's true. Like COVID, or the vaccination.
And
what
so
we got.
we're willing to put a GMO medicine inside our body because we know we're going to get a benefit. We're not that eager to put a GMO food inside our body because the GMO food was designed to give a benefit to the farmer, not to the consumer.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think I have the follow-up question on the biotech in medicine versus agriculture. So
Yeah.
that's my okay. So before we go into the that question on the biotech, right? I mean, the biotech and public perception. So I have this question on what communication or policy strategies could align public acceptance of biotech in agriculture with that around biotech in medicine. So that's the question I have, because as you say, we have seen. I mean, we have seen breakthrough innovations in the field of medicine with the kind of technology advancements what we have. We had even with AI, we are trying to do a lot of applications of AI in the clinical trials or even in the research, especially when it comes to medicine or biotech and medicine. But again, my question is for you to see what communication or policy strategies could align public acceptance, right? More acceptance for biotech in agriculture. Do you think what is your take on that?
I don't know.
I think it's
People
not.
have been-
I didn't think so. It's like you have seen for the last 30 years or more than that, but it's you still see that it's completely gone out of
It's
sight.
stigmatized. It's stigmatized, and it's a little bit like nuclear power. If you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while delivering electricity to large numbers of people, one of the best ways to do it is with nuclear power. But it's been stigmatized ever since. Well, it was stigmatized initially because it's associated with military weapons. But then nuclear scares in the United States, the 3 Mile Island disaster in the 1970s, which wasn't a disaster because no one was killed, but it frightened people. And so we put tight regulations on the building of nuclear power plants, and very few have been built since then. It's a little environmentalists say they want to do something about climate change, but they don't want nuclear power. Environmentalists also say they want to address agricultural productivity and hunger, but they don't want GMOs. They're they're caught in a taboo that their own campaigns have helped to create. And I don't know if there's any way out of it. I had thought, okay, technology is moving forward now. We've gone beyond transgenic GMO plants, where we transfer DNA from one
Yeah.
species into another. We now have genome editing, which is very different. Instead of bringing in foreign DNA, you simply edit something out of the genome of a plant, or you upregulate or downregulate something that's already in that genome. So there's no foreign DNA. There's less of the frankenfood anxiety. And so when CRISPR came along in 2015, I thought, oh, okay, this is going to convince people that agricultural biotechnology will deliver useful benefits and it won't frighten people. And in much of the world, that was true. Countries that had not commercialized transgenic crops, including Japan, including some countries in Africa even, and China, have gone ahead with, in Japan, have gone ahead with genome editing with CRISPR crops. But then the European Union stepped in, and the European Court decided that genome edited CRISPR crops had to be regulated as though they were transgenic crops. And so Europe now, once again, is making it extremely difficult for farmers to plant and for food manufacturers to use agricultural crops that were developed using genome editing technology. So we don't know if genome editing is going to spread much faster than transgenic crops, which is to say, not very fast at all.
I think you put a picture of the first genome edited food, pasta, in your in your book too. I think so when you say genome editing, just for everybody's awareness, right? I think and the DNA sequence process, CRISPR, clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. So that's the CRISPR stands for, right? So I think, as you say, while we have adopted from a medicine or a biotech in medicine to improve the efficiency in terms of curing a lot of diseases, we are thinking a lot in, or probably stigmatized these kind of technology advancements in the field of agriculture is probably, a summary I get. I don't you, as you say, I don't think so any way out, or in future to see if there is a real benefit out of it.
Yeah, I don't think a communication strategy is going to remove the stigma.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. My last question on this is, what's next in eco-modern food? And I think you're pro for imitation meats. I think you have talked even earlier is, okay, while there is a lot of land and water resources exhausted by the livestock, so imitation meats actually is doing something which is with less or no livestock or animal farming, fewer animals, lower emission, and land restoration, right? So how far we are with imitation meats reaching price parity or acceptance with the public? I know that Impossible Burger, there are a lot of options today. I think from the time you wrote to now, you would have seen the amount of people who are vegan or probably trying out the alternate meats or imitation meats, which taste similar to the real meat. So my question is, what's your take on the?
Yeah, my My views on this have changed actually since I wrote my book. When I wrote my book, it was in the middle of the COVID crisis, and plant-based imitation meat was enjoying an investment boom and considerable popularity with consumers who, during COVID, saw the value chain for meat production disrupted, and they thought they'd try plant-based imitation meat. And so Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers and other plant-based imitation animal protein products were suddenly increasing in sales at a rapid rate. And I thought, well, this makes sense because we're also in the middle of an environmental crisis, and sensitivities about the land and the water and the resources going to animal agriculture, especially beef cattle. Those sensitivities and concerns are going to drive environmentally conscientious consumers away from animal products to imitation products. And so I raised some of those hopes in my book, and since then there's been stagnation in the plant-based imitation meat space. The boom didn't last. Investment declined. Plant-based imitation meats never got more than about 1.5% of the market share in the United States. Interest has gone down. The head of the Impossible Company admitted that they probably made a mistake emphasizing the environmental advantages of Impossible Burgers. They said they learned that consumers aren't going to change their behavior because of their environmental concerns, and they decided they were being too elite, too green. They actually changed the packaging of the Impossible Burger. They changed it from a green wrap to a red wrap, hoping it would be more appealing to meat eaters. And they lowered the price by 20%. But still, Impossible Burgers haven't taken off. They're less expensive than organic ground beef, but still more expensive than conventional ground beef. So if you like hamburgers, if you're a consumer of ground beef, and if you can get the real thing with the taste and the texture and the cooking properties you're familiar with for less than an Impossible Burger, why would you get an Impossible Burger? It turns out it's a more difficult space to move into. Now, we do have a much greater uptake of plant-based imitation milk products from almonds, from rice, from
oats.
but still the market share of those imitation dairy products is in the milk market. It's only about 14 or 15%. It's by no means taking over. So I'm not as positive about substituting plant-based imitation meats for meat from live animals today as I was 3 or 4 years ago. And we know that the cell-grown alternative, where it's not based on plants, but you take real muscle cells out of live animals and grow them out in a bioreactor.
Yep.
So that you get real meat, but you don't have to raise and slaughter animals. These cell-grown products,
The cell-based meats, yes.
yeah, they were highly touted for a while as something that would solve a lot of problems at one time, but it's still an experimental technology. It's still very expensive. The only place in the world where consumers can buy cell-grown meat products is in a single high-end restaurant in Singapore.
Singapore, yep.
Where cell-grown, I think it's cell-grown chicken meat is on the menu mostly just as a novelty item. I don't think this is going anywhere either. And in the United States, there's been enormous pushback against cell-grown meats. In half a dozen states, legislatures have enacted restrictions on the sale of cell-grown meats. The Food and Drug Administration has approved, but individual state legislatures are saying, no, we don't want that. And they're responding primarily to strong lobbying efforts by the livestock industry, as you might expect.
That's always there. When it comes to the dairy and agriculture and how the policies are. I mean, even if you go to any hospitals for that matter, the kind of food suggested, even on the different websites across the US or everywhere, there is an influence by the dairy and agriculture to an extent in terms of promoting some of the products. Yeah. Okay, I think with that, I have done with all my questions. So now I think I will move to the rapid fire. So
Okay.
it's probably, I can say, political science or or agriculture in 60 seconds, or as quick as possible. You can fire away the answers. So one food myth you wish everyone would stop believing. That's my first.
Yeah, I wish people would look at the science and stop believing that organically grown foods are more nutritious or safer to eat or better for the environment than conventionally grown foods.
Got it. Okay. Especially in a developed country like America.
Well, that's
Lot of
yeah.
reg-
It's in the developed countries that organically grown crops have this exaggerated and I think undeserved reputation for being superior.
Got you. If you could change one US food policy overnight, what would it be?
I would put state level taxes or even a federal tax on an excise tax on the sale of sugar sweetened beverages.
Perfect. Yes. I think it's a quicker for you. You don't have to think about it. All right. A book other than your own that deeply shaped your views on food or policy.
Well, this is a book that no one will have heard of unless you have an interest in food and agriculture and in agricultural economics. It's a book by Bruce Gardner, who was an agricultural economist at the University of Maryland. He wrote a book titled American Agriculture in the 20th Century, and it is encyclopedic.
Wow.
It presents the best and the most recent literature on food and agricultural policy, all in a single volume from Harvard University Press.
Great. I would look for it definitely. And since you said it's like encyclopedia, I would. It's important to go through it. So let me take that note and order it. So what's one idea from RFK Jr.'s food agenda that you actually agree with?
Well, I agree with RFK Jr. that the average American diet is resulting in far too much chronic disease.
Yeah, the standard American diet, the short form.
Especially diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
Got it. True. Organic, local, or biotech? Which one do you think has most misunderstood reputation?
Well, I think organic, as I've already said, organic and local have an exaggerated reputation for being virtuous and advantageous. And biotech, most people probably wouldn't know what you mean by biotech. If you said GMO, they might say, oh, I know what that is. But that has an exaggerated reputation for being disadvantageous. So we got two apples and one orange here, and it's hard to compare them apples to apples.
True. No, very true. Yeah, got you. That's right. If you were designing a school lunch from scratch, what's the first thing you would include and first thing you would remove?
The first thing I would remove is chocolate milk.
Perfect.
And the first thing I would add I couldn't decide when I saw this question. I would like to add peanut butter spread on an apple slice.
Okay, great.
But if that requires too much labor behind the counter, I would settle for hummus spread on a wheat cracker.
Or ant on a log. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a good one. What's the future of food you hope to see by 2035 in just 5 words or more?
End armed conflict in Africa.
Okay, that's very powerful. Yeah, very true. I think everybody should pray for that. One guilty pleasure snack you secretly enjoy, even if it's not clean or local.
Yes, but I don't really feel guilty. It would be when I go to a football game, I want to have an Italian sausage with onions and peppers on a roll.
Okay, great. Crops, consumer, or corporations, who carries the biggest responsibility to resetting the table? Yeah.
It's none of the above. You forgot to mention governments.
Yes. Governments. Yeah, that's right. You're right. But I mean, there is two perspective to look at. I think consumers, you think, still has a responsibility, but as you say, if I go to CVS, even I can become healthy and unhealthy in the same visit. So
Yeah, I think consumers they certainly have an opportunity if they're health conscious to learn what to avoid. I think responsibility, social responsibility rests more with food manufacturers that put unhealthy products in the store, products that they have designed to be virtually addictive. I think that creates some responsibility for them to change their behavior, but they're not going to unless a government policy ensures that all food manufacturers have to play by a higher standard. Otherwise, competition in the marketplace will prevent them from going first.
yes, very true. I agree. Biotech breakthrough you're most excited about right now?
Well, it's probably in medicine rather than agriculture. There are now CRISPR therapies for sickle cell. And this is a terribly painful disease that afflicts mostly Africans and descendants of Africans. And we have a therapy now, but it's much too expensive to be widely used. So I'm hoping for a breakthrough to make that therapy more affordable.
More affordable, yeah. True. Corn or soy?
Both are valuable and make healthy contributions, I think, to the human food supply. I would say one of the most valuable food products is a corn-soy blend. It's called CSB, and it's used by humanitarian agencies to to help people who are severely undernourished
Yeah.
recover. It's an affordable source of both energy and protein, and they work well together. So I would say corn and soy.
Yes, a blend. That's wonderful. Lecture hall or farm field? I think tricky
I
or
would, yeah, the trick has always been to bring knowledge gained in the farm field
into the lecture.
into the academic world, and
Yeah.
to bring laboratory science from academicians to farmers. And it's very difficult to do, but the United States government found a way to do it 150 years ago when it created the land grant university system, which gives faculty in the lecture hall what are called extension appointments. And in order to do their job, they have to bring the knowledge not only to the students in the classroom, but to farmers through the extension service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it's been one of it accelerated the uptake of highly productive science in U.S. agriculture throughout the 20th century. And it's so I would say bring the lecture hall to the farm field and bring the farm field to the lecture hall. Don't separate these two
That's
or
separate.
choose between them.
Yes, as of course. I think the cross-pollination of the knowledge between the people on the ground and people who are experts, it's very important to bridge that gap. Yeah, you're right. I think very well said. Laura, I mean, that shows your wisdom. Ebook or hardcover? Being an author, so I think I'm curious.
Do audiobooks count as ebooks?
Yeah, it probably digital. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, then that makes it even more. I prefer ebooks, not only because I can listen to them on a long drive in the car as an audiobook, but also because I can read them after the lights are out in the bedroom without disturbing my spouse.
True. I think these days it's a combination, I believe, because even I start a chapter in the physical hardcover, and then when you're driving or doing something else, your long drive or you're outside, then you're listening, you just switch the next chapters to the audiobooks too. So yeah, it's a combination. Yes. So we have to adapt to the technological developments too. If not food policy, what would you be writing about?
I think I'd be writing about nuclear weapons.
Wow, powerful. I would like to, hopefully anything in the upcoming years on nuclear weapons.
Well, of course it's in the news today, but I've lived with nuclear weapons ever since. I was born in 1945, in the same month that the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And so my lifetime exactly spans the nuclear age, and I've spent many an air raid drill, terrified when I was in grade school, ducking under the desk to avoid the incoming Russian bomber attack that never quite came, but it could still come one way or the other. And so I've been fascinated by this subject for a long time, and I would probably write about it if I weren't even more fascinated with food and agriculture.
Yes. Hopefully, I think if you're thinking about writing about in the coming years, then we will wait for it. But I think your contributions to the food and policy and the agriculture and political sciences definitely is going to stay for years to come for people to gain the wisdom. A food you once believed was healthy and now you avoid?
Whole milk.
That's a good one. Yeah, you're right. If you had to choose this is the last one. It's a dinner guest from the world of food activism. Who would it be?
It would, I don't know if you'd call her a food activist, but I think she qualifies. Marion Nessel, who is
Yes,
a who is a
right. Food
nutrition,
politics. Yes,
a
she writes
nutrition scientist who has a wonderful blog titled Food Politics.
politics.
And I've met her a number of times, and she doesn't pretend to know a lot about agriculture. She is focused on food and nutrition. And I've learned a lot from her about food and nutrition policy. She helped convince me that that food companies were responsible for a lot of our dietary health problems. And I agree with most of what she has written. And I know her well enough to know that she would be a delightful dinner partner.
Definitely. Yeah. I listened to her too. Yeah, I think her and she, as you said, she's writing that article on food politics. Yes, I think the recent article she wrote about the I think on livestock or I think the salmonella, I guess. So yeah, I mean I follow her too. It's a lot of information and wisdom she shares. I think she's also in New York. Great. I think that's all from my end, Robert. It was such an honor to talk to you and get your perspective on all your book and also Make America Healthy Again and all the different topics what we have covered. I mean I've learned a lot through this conversation and it's such fascinating to hear you and get your perspective and knowledge shared across different topics. So I'm definitely privileged to bring you to my show after a long time.
Well, thank you. Every author is, of course, eager to get reactions, feedback, questions from people who actually bought and read their book. And so for me, this has been a great pleasure as well. And thank you, Naga, very much.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. If you like this conversation, please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for latest updates in my show, CaffeloguewithNaga. Thank you so much.